I am Asia. I am an extensive and heterogeneous region, both politically, socially, and economically. I encompass into myself some of the most sophisticated economies and fastest growing nations: Japan, the innovation giant, India, and People's Republic of China, and I am even home to some of the fragile ones, including Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Nepal, North Korea, several others. Once upon a time, I was one of the most economically swelled blocks in the world. I catered to most of the world's share and financial stock. In those days, good old days, I provided nearly 60% of the world's GDP. However, I witnessed mass colonialism, and it was only after the Industrial Revolution and the last 2 decades that I proved my true revival, emerging and gaining on the footprints after the great economic depressions of 1960s and 1999. Now, I am in the middle of a revolutionary and historic transformation. People have started to call it a century marked with Asian beginning. Asian Development Bank call it the advent of the Asian century, an era where the economic center of gravity would shift from North Atlantic side to the middle of me, Asia. Like any other transformation, I have also my own factors that govern this change, but unlike any other transformation, I don't totally depend on it. I have my drivers, my factors, which include financial drivers, entrepreneurship and technological drivers, labor force and capital deepening as the drivers, climate change and energy efficiency as the driver, and communication revolution as the driver. Recently, I have been the hub of global manufacturing and IT services, apparently young and the skilled labor force providing the necessary capital deepening required is the driver, while the fronts of the climate change and energy efficiency are the ones that my countries are hopping up to prove with. These are my strengths. In this era of communication revolution, the journey that once started in the Middle East of Egypt and Tunisia has now reached the footholds of PRC and India, and it is the major implication not just in communication as a revolution, but also by reducing the cost of information processing, marking Asia's growth, and it has major implications in both the era of public and private sectors. In a way, these factors provide and reflect upon me. They are mirrors to me. They show me my strengths. These strengths are the root to my opportunities. However, they also show me my weaknesses and my threats. Threats to development. Well, strengths. I have my own strengths. I am the fastest growing economic region. I underwent V-shaped recovery from economic depressions of 1960s and 1999s, showing the world an economic light of hope. I have led the front in R&D and technology through high investments in my GDP. Well, I have a very high regional integration whenever it comes to free trade and a very high race relations structure. I am the global hub of manufacturing and IT services owing to my cheap and low cost labor. I am also the largest saving reservoir in the world and a net lender in terms of loan whenever it comes to most of the developed countries. It is the heap of these strengths that provide me a path to global opportunities. I would soon host the global equity, debt and market shares well before 2050. Continuing on the same trajectories will provide me the share of 51% of the global GDP, and that too before the same time period. I would continue and will soon account for 70% of the world's stock between 2030 and 2050. With the recent wave of climate efficiencies and energy provident, the discovery of the recent gas hydrate recovery technology by one of my countries, that is Japan, illustrate that I have the capability to take the stance on energy efficiency and climate change. And also, most of my countries have a total factor of productivity that would be soon converging with the US and that of the Europe. It is in light of these opportunities and reasons that economic center of gravity will be soon shifting from the North Atlantic side to the center of my heart, Asia. as said by Asian Development Bank. In spite of all those strengths and opportunities, my societies are rapidly aging away, and the workforce in large, particularly in the countries of Japan, Republic of Korea, and China, is dying away because of the age group. The average age of the population lies between 60s and 70s. My economies are also ranked lower with respect to gender parity. There is a regional inequity between the economies of Asia, one being the hub of manufacturing and services, and other suffers from the same loss. Almost all my countries are tackling away with the challenge of corruption and governance. Most of the countries faces the problem and infrastructure requirements. However, all this boils down to a major weakness I suffer, the failure to resolve conflict and disparities between countries. I, being the home of 5 intense nuclear power, face intense competition for the overcoming and surpassing each another. It is because of these weaknesses that I fear the threats. I fear the consequences. Since most of my economies and nations are middle income economies, therefore they face a problem of falling in middle income trap, that is the inability to make a transition from reserve driven growth to productivity driven growth, showing a nearly constant and low quantifying GDP due to the host of domestic, political and social challenge. As the Asians aspire for a higher standard of living, there would be intense competition for finite natural resources that I host, the rising disparities across sub-regions and countries, which in turn amplify and magnify this problem. Figures indicate that I would soon become the largest energy consuming bloc by 2030 and would surpass OECD. This poses a threat on the climate change and the energy consumption in the world, pointing the needle of economic development as well as the energy consumption to my face. Since most of my countries are still facing up with the problem of governance and institutional capacity, that is the requirements and the failure to cope up with, all these would in turn boil down to most of the values of threats that I would soon face. The journey that once started with the advent and recovery of a single nation has now become widespread. Development is more sustainable now. I am growing. Asia is growing. As said by ADB previously, the forthcoming century is going to be an Asian century, but nothing is on autopilot, nothing as ordained as it seems. Even maintaining the current trajectories would require indispensable efforts, tackling global issues with local and regional cooperation, evolving a free global trading system, taking decisions within the domain of reliability of global commons, and therefore establishing a new legacy of Asian panorama that is vivid clarity of global ideology. This is all because people have been saying that in current productivity and growth rate, Asia, would share 51% of the world's GDP and would hop into more than $148 trillion, tremendously boiling it down almost $38,600 GDP per capita. But I say that it's not about dynamic statistic, it's more about the world, it's more about connection, because now more than ever we live in one world. We face issues that can only be addressed internationally, sustainable futures, and changing the world economy with Asia. In the light of the analysis, a plan is required, a mandate providing out issues both regionally and globally, a plan that will rebuild my strengths to seek out and give out a route to the opportunities, and to eradicate the threats, to rebuild my weaknesses into strengths. A plan is required.